On that note, I want to talk about this lecture that we're here tonight. This is our Gilbert Higgins lecture. It's named for a very important member of the historical community. At this time, I'd like to invite our Vice President, Vicki, to come up and say a few words about Gilbert.
Thanks, Rebecca. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Thanks. So tonight I'm going to introduce Gilbert Higgins and tell you a little bit about him and why we have this lecture. I'm shamelessly cribbing from a beautiful tribute to Gilbert that was written by Catherine Dempsey in 2009. If you'd like to read that in its entirety, it is on the website, if you'd like to take a look at that. But tonight I want to tell you a little bit about Gilbert Higgins. He said that his love of history began when his grandfather, Judge Casey, gave him a copy of the first Newfoundland newspaper printed on locally produced newsprint. This carried through in his work as a librarian and as an outstanding committed volunteer with many heritage organizations. The Museum Association of Newfoundland and Labrador, the Association of Newfoundland and Labrador Archivists, the Historical Society, the Heritage Foundation, and the Historic Trust were all made richer by Gilbert's contributions and his encyclopedic knowledge of the province's writers and historians. In April 1998, Gilbert was presented with the Newfoundland Historical Society's Heritage Award, as his longtime passion had been the preservation of Newfoundland's history and culture. At the meeting of the Historical Society in 23rd November 1998, John Fitzgerald presented a eulogy to Gilbert. He quoted a wartime telegram from Winston Churchill to President Roosevelt. "It was fun to be in the same century with you." John added that with Gilbert, it was more than fun. It was an honor and a privilege to be in the same century as Gilbert Higgins. And for this, we will always remember and celebrate his life. So his great contributions to the work of the Museum Association, the Association of Newfoundland and Labrador Archives, and the Newfoundland and Labrador Historical Society led to the establishment of a memorial fund, which is used to support the annual Gilbert Higgins Lecture. So thank you so much to Gilbert Higgins for his dedication, his love of history and culture in this place. Thanks to all of you for being here and being online. And thank you to Dr. Jeff Webb, who's going to give our lecture this evening.
Thank you, Vicki. So I've promised our speaker I'll be brief tonight. Dr. Jeff Webb is a historian of Newfoundland and Labrador. In a lot of ways, that encapsulates it. He is, of course, renowned in his field and has done numerous articles, books, his most recent being, of course, The Cause of Art, Professionalizing the Art Gallery of Newfoundland and Labrador, recently out in 2024. And he is interested in a broad research agenda about Newfoundland and Labrador culture. His talk tonight is about that culture. For much of its history, Newfoundland had a vibrant oral culture, but no visual culture. And tonight, he's going to talk to us more so about the start of that, the starting in the 1920s, when a group of women and men tried to change that by opening an art gallery that they hoped would foster Newfoundland art. I think on that note, we're at the point in the evening where we'd like to hear from our speaker. So I'm going to invite Jeff to come up. And again, thank you all, and we'll have questions at the end. Okay, we will, just so note, we're going to be very mindful of the audio as we get started. Jeff is on a different mic, so we'll just double check in here with our audience in person as we get going.
How does that sound? The sound okay? Can you hear me?
I think I can manage that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I have to say, have some mixed feelings about this. I was kind of hoping that no one would be here tonight because everyone would have bought a copy of the book and we're staying home reading it. So I had not realized when I agreed to do this that it was going to be somewhat prefatory to this very interesting program coming up on the history of women. And the two topics intersect in a way that might not be obvious to everyone. And that is that many of the suffragists, such as Franny McNeill and Agnes Eyre, and many others, were, once they won the right to vote for women, turned their hands to a whole lot of other civic engagement, including art. Not surprisingly, in the 1920s, for many women, watercolor painting and that sort of thing was a kind of socially acceptable and popular pastime. So Franny Deal and Agnes Eyre were both well-known painters. Eyre also, sort of pioneer botanist, and Eyre and McNeill, as well as the manager of the Grand Falls paper mill, were three of the people that led the Newfoundland Society of Art, both to promote art in the country, but also to promote a place for the exhibit of art. Not surprisingly, as you can imagine, recreational painters felt they should have an outlet at a time when there was no art dealer, there was nobody as a go-between between somebody that might purchase art and somebody producing it. And they recognized that although Newfoundland was geographically much larger than, say, the Netherlands, nonetheless, we didn't have the artistic tradition that many small European countries had. Now, to fast forward a little, my previous book, Observing the Outports, I wrote a lot about faculty members at Memorial and students at Memorial who were studying Newfoundland culture and society. And one of the things that they all would have agreed with very few exceptions, that they all would have agreed with, is that Newfoundland culture was an oral one. It was songs, it was poetry, not novels, but songs, poetry. It was tall tales. It was fairy stories. It was an oral culture transmitted from mother to daughter and father to son. There was, of course, a great material culture in Newfoundland. People built boats, houses. People made pails and household implements out of wood. Women knitted and hooked rugs. And all of these aspects of material culture were primarily for use rather than just for their aesthetic qualities. Now, they all had, of course, an aesthetic dimension. Everybody would have thought, well, that's a beautiful boat. That boat looks right. This is how you build a house. And certainly if you have just a kind of cursory glance at the churches around the island, you will see the difference in stylistic for what a Methodist church is supposed to look like and what a Roman Catholic church is supposed to look like. So although Newfoundlanders had a large repertoire of material objects, nonetheless, none of that was really art for art's sake in the way that painting or sculpture would be. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't Newfoundland painters. Certainly in the early 19th century, there are ads in the paper for watercolors that, middle class, wealthier people, they would have aspired to have the same sort of hobbies that similar social classes in Britain or other parts of the empire would have had. But this was a tough place to earn a living making art. It's probably a tough place to make a living making art now. But the gallery was, of course, the key in people's minds to be able to do two things, to achieve two things. First of all, give people an opportunity to see things that they might buy, and secondly, to give artists an opportunity to display their work to others and maybe to learn from each other. by seeing art. Not too surprisingly, for Newfoundlanders that were unable to travel extensively, magazines, pictures in magazines, newspapers, that sort of thing, and also the lithographs that one could buy of religious scenes or pastoral scenes. That was really the only visual culture that was widely available, the only commercial culture that was widely available. And it was, of course, all made somewhere else. And so by the 1920s, with the Newfoundland Society of Art, you had the first stirring of a group of people that wanted to foster greater artistic production, and they saw a gallery as the key to doing that. Now, by the 1930s, pretty poor time to start any kind of cultural initiative. Memorial University College stepped into a lot of roles that in other places governments would have done or would have taken, or municipal organizations or municipal governments would have. And Memorial University College began the instruction in art that that the would-be artists, the aspiring artists, desired. So the earliest art instruction here in the 1930s was funded by the Carnegie Corporation of New York as part of their overall idea of educating the public, educating people, bringing Americans and Canadians and the people in other parts of the world together in a kind of socially progressive form. The earliest exhibition of art on campus was the initiative, again, of a couple of women, one of whom was Muriel Steele, who was married to A.C. Hunter of A.C. Hunter Library fame. And Muriel Hunter was an American woman who taught Spanish and French at the college part-time. And given her experience of having lived in Paris and having a knowledge of art, she was the person who took on the task of mounting little exhibitions from a Carnegie Corporation library of basically reproductions and photographs of famous artwork from around the world. So Muriel Hunter would organize the little exhibitions in the Parade Street campus, right, in one of the classrooms down there or the library down there. These little exhibitions, things like the theme of Italian art or the river in art, right? She would take little themes and put together these little exhibitions to show people, show viewers in the city the full range of artistic expression in kind of Western civilization sort of thing, if you can imagine that. It was really, really heavily emphasized, not surprisingly heavily, with European art, ancient Greek and Roman statues, then, the Renaissance and medieval art, the Renaissance, and less so, but some modern art. So in addition to Muriel Hunter, you also had the librarian at the time, Sadie Organ, who was herself a very innovative person, interested in a lot of different kinds of cultural things. She was one of the early people who advocated collecting Newfoundland folklore, for example, something for which she's slightly remembered, but she also was an advocate for having art in the Munn Library and advocated for gallery space in the Munn Library.
Say
city organ, Organ. And so, so you had this kind of art education stream that was coming out of the university, environment at this point. And you also had amateur painters, and the amateur painters were also, some people in the audience might find this interesting as well. Some of the amateur painters, through the Canadian Federation of University Women, organized the Art Gallery Association of Newfoundland. And so the Art Gallery Association, as I say, it was an offshoot. At one of the meetings of the Canadian Federation for University Women, some of the women who were amateur painters thought, well, what we need in this city is we need an art gallery, right? We need to have a place to be able to show people art, to teach them about art, and also we need a place that amateur painters, that recreational painters can display their work, and that'll be so good for everybody. So a group of men and women, many of them are married couples, some single women, some husbands of recreational painters. So this group of men and women lobbied throughout the 1940s and 1950s for an art gallery, right? They wanted there to be a city art gallery so that the citizens of the city, citizens of St. John's, could experience what was a kind of to be expected. If you were a progressive modern city, you would want to have an art gallery. Things changed a great deal after Confederation in a whole lot of ways. And one of the pertinent things was the development of an extension service at Memorial University. Joe Smallwood quite famously said that he would rather have an extension service with a university attached to it than a university with an extension service attached to it. Joe Smallwood had, as probably only somebody who's self-taught can have, Joe Smallwood had an inflated idea of the benefits of a university education. Now, I should be quiet about that because this is how I earn a living. But Joe Smallwood wanted the extension service of the university to really transform Newfoundland society and culture. Now, for many of the things that extension service are doing, and we could take a week spending about extension service. Many of the things that extension service were doing were serving the needs of rural people in very practical, material ways, right? How do you grow potatoes? How do you avoid, how do you have cleanliness in your fishing stage so that your salt cod is not ruined, right? All of those sorts of practical things. But it also included what we might think of as cultural and aesthetic things as well. So they had a drama, a specialist in drama. They had a specialist in music, Ignatius Rumboldt, some well known. Some of you will remember his name for certain. And they hired the first specialist in art, Christopher Pratt. Now, the Pratt was hired to basically teach art to people, not as an artist himself, and certainly not as a gallery director, right? Christopher Pratt was hired, and initially they wanted to base him in Grand Falls, so that he could be centrally located and travel around the island teaching fishermen's sons how to paint, and learning about art would have all these positive cultural effects and make people, give them pride, in craftsmanship, give them confidence, give them all of these benefits that one might think of in cultural pursuits. Now, Pratt, he said he was unable to find a house in Grand Falls that he could move into, which may or may not have been true. and came back to St. John's, where he took up a office in the Henrietta Harvey building. And Pratt, you may have heard him tell these stories many times. He often told them. Pratt was very unhappy working for Memorial. One of the things he was unhappy about was the dim light and the awful place that it was working in the ground floor of the Henrietta Harvey building, which is actually it's where my office is now. And so I'm less convinced that this was a real matter. So Pratt, and of course his wife Mary Pratt, also an aspiring artist. So the two of them did some art appreciation lectures, right? They showed slides. They talked to people about Dutch art. They talked to people about Rembrandt, all of those sorts of things. And also taught people how to do watercolors and drawing and all of those sorts of things. Pratt also was told to hang some art in the Henrietta Harvey building, told to hang some art on the walls. So he borrowed, even before he started his job at Memorial, he went to Ottawa, went to the National Gallery in Ottawa, had a look at all of their art collection and selected a group of paintings that represented 150 years of Canadian art. And brought that back to St. John's and exhibited the art here, and found that for many people that saw it, this was the first time that they had ever seen any real paintings. The first time in their life that they had seen, oil paint on canvas, or oil paint on wood, or watercolor on paper. That previous to this, their whole experience with art had been photographs of paintings, or they had been, they had seen magazine illustrations of paintings. And so for many people, this was a first kind of experience that they had with actually seeing artistic work. Now, Pratt had a pretty good relationship with the faculty members. He also had a pretty good relationship with the aspiring recreational painters, right? The very people that had campaigned for a Newfoundland gallery. And what they got for this was they got basically a room in the Munn Library for paint. So it's not really a full gallery, right? But Pratt had a good relationship with the aspiring amateur painters and he was able to share having recreational painters, not trained professional painters, to take turns. So they would mount an exhibition, and Pratt would give lectures using slides, and Pratt would bring in paint from the mainland. And so it was a happy kind of compromise between the desire for amateur painters to show their work and Pratt's own idea of showing work that people should aspire to, right? Had this tension between professional and recreational. He bridged that really well. Now I'm going to use the phrase recreational painter, or I might accidentally say amateur painter or Sunday painter, right? But these are because I want to not give you the false impression that some of these recreational painters were not highly talented or extremely motivated, because many of them were very highly skilled and were producing great art. And some of them had actually been to art school. So it's not even a case where we can decide, well, in one hand, you've got people that have been to art school, like Pratt himself having been to Mount Allison Art School and the Glasgow School of Art. And then others. There was a far more overlap between those who were trained and aspiring professionals and those who were recreational. So Pratt decided to leave to paint full time because he thought that just as if you were a professional singer, if you spent all of your time with people who were tone deaf, you would never become better. As somebody who wanted to become a better painter himself, spending all of his time with people that were not as skilled as himself didn't provide any kind of impetus for growth. So Pratt, as everyone knows, dragged his wife and kids out to the side of a river and was never heard of ever again. To replace Pratt, the university hired Peter Bell. Now, Peter Bell was a tremendously fun man. He was an Englishman who had problems with authority and had been teaching art in South Africa to a group of Black students. In fact, he was it was the only school for Black students in South Africa that taught art. And Bell had gotten himself into trouble because of his protests about apartheid, a fun story in itself. And Bell realized that he had to get out of South Africa or risk prison, risk his family's well-being, and had a connection with Gwen Seary and Ron Seary. Ron Seary was at that time the head of the English department at Memorial. Seary had taught in South Africa for a while. Seary and Ron and Gwen Seary had been friends with Peter Bell's wife, and Peter Bell's wife wrote a letter saying, "Hey, we got to get out of South Africa," and Memorial hired him. So Bell was hired, as Pratt had been, to teach art to rural people, and to go out to the fishermen's stages at the end of the day when they had finished putting away their gear, and to get out the canvas and start them painting. So, but Bell disliked teaching art as much as Pratt did. Disliked teaching people who weren't highly skilled already. He was just not somebody that had a great deal of not a great deal of patience for that. So while Bell was looking for a way of sort of getting away from teaching art to, I'll be blunt, teaching art to housewives, the thing that he hated the most. And there's a very, very clear kind of gender prejudice here that runs through all of these people, right? Part of, men are active, men create things, great men are artists, women are dabblers, women are craftspeople, right? And so there's a great deal. Bell had less interest in teaching women how to paint than I think I could possibly describe. So for Bell, running the gallery, even though he was an employee of Munn Extension, he was supposed to be teaching painting to rural people, right? So I hope this is one of those explosive lithium batteries I've been hearing so much about. So, please, should I start on fire, I would like somebody to alert me to that. So for Bell, right, running a gallery had several functions. It got him out of teaching art, and also Bell was somebody he really did not like Newfoundland landscape. He did not like the climate. He did not like the place. Some of you will remember Bell built and lived in geodesic domes. And the domes, last I looked, are still out there, right? And raised orchids, right? Bell was somebody for whom the tropical flora of South Africa very much appealed to him. The tundra and boreal forest of the St. John's region had no interest in him whatsoever. And his paintings, actually, I quite like his paintings. Many of his paintings, are of plants inside of his geodesic dome, and they're quite beautiful. I really like them. And so for Bell, the gallery work was a way of getting away from having to teach painting. He painted in his own geodesic domes, and a connection to Canada was part of a larger artistic conversation, right? Bell disliked the recreational painters. He disliked what they were doing. He didn't respect the kind of subject matters that they took on. But Bell started collecting contemporary Canadian art at a time when not very many Canadian galleries did. So it was within the financial means of the university to buy it. He started collecting Canadian art. He was one of the organizers of the Atlantic Province's art circuit between him and the galleries in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island, so they could share exhibitions. It was, after all, it was cheaper for you to create an exhibition in Halifax and then ship it to St. John and ship it to St. John's and ship it to Charlottetown than it was to create new ones all of the time. So each gallery would create a certain number of their own exhibitions and then would move them around, right? Would share them around. So this had the benefit of painters and art appreciates, right? Art lovers could see a greater range of art than they otherwise would be able to, because all of these exhibitions would be rolling through. And for Bell, it gave him an opportunity to get on the plane to go to Ottawa, to get on the plane to go to Edmonton, to get on the plane and to go to Mount Allison in Sackville, to meet with fellow curators, to convince them to take Newfoundland paintings into their exhibitions, into their catalog, and also to arrange for him to be borrowing their work. So without Bell and his successor, Edith Goodrich, I think, put it well, without Bell's influence, we would have had a much more provincial, in the kind of negative sense of the word provincial, we would have had a much more narrow, inward-looking art gallery than the one we had. It was Bell, I don't like it, but Bell's disdain for many of the local amateur painters that he found himself surrounded by, and his desire to kind of, at least only mentally, to get out of St. John's, right, to get out of this environment. That's what created an art gallery that was Canadian in its orientation, and that had a great effect. Now, no good deed goes unpunished, and in this case, no bad deed goes unpunished either. The recreational painters, these are the people that had campaigned long and hard for a gallery for Newfoundland. And they felt that it was their gallery in some respects. When the Monarch Gallery moved into the Arts and Culture Center in 1967, when it took up 3 rooms, right, 3 exhibition rooms in the Arts and Culture Center, the recreational painters, they could be forgiven for thinking, well, our tax dollars pay for the gallery, right? So we should be able to, at least some of the time, be able to show our work in what is our gallery. Christopher Pratt was, I think, more skilled diplomat in, smoothing over the tensions that inevitably arise between people. Peter Bell's instinct was always to escalate. Peter Bell's instinct was never to smooth the waters over, never to make people happy. It was always to escalate. So a war emerged between the recreational painters, the Art Gallery Association, and Peter Bell. And the Art Gallery Association, they had a powerful ally. They had a powerful ally in the manager of the Arts and Culture Center, John Perlin. Now, Perlin was, as many of you will know, you probably knew him well, better than me. I shouldn't be talking to you about him. You should be telling me about him. But, Bell was somebody, Perlin was somebody from a very socially connected, responsible family, very charitable family, also one that had great interest in art and aesthetic matters. Ray Perlin is not, right, John's aunt is only one example of, Ray had been a student of Hans Holman, a very highly regarded modernist painter in New York, and Ray had learned art in Paris, right? So she was very, very connected. So Perlin, I think, Perlin saw that he had some credentials to be able to be making have opinions on the art gallery. More importantly for Perlin, Peter Bell was an accomplished artist, was a very energetic impresario in bringing all of these exhibitions together, but he was an awful manager. He was a terrible administrator. Bills went unpaid, correspondence was unanswered. He had no interest at all in the day-to-day management of any kind of institution of gallery. And so it was inevitable, perhaps, I'm going to use the word inevitable again in a minute now. It was inevitable that there would be a clash between Perlin and Bell. The recreational painters felt, I think quite rightly, felt that if the provincial government took control of the gallery away from the university, that it would be more amenable to their work, that they would be able to access their gallery if the provincial government ran it instead of Memorial. They believed that the university administration at Memorial was unable to control Bell, that he was a loose cannon. They were unable to control him. So the provincial government dithered about whether or not to take control of the university, gallery. Now, parallel to this, Joe Smallwood hired a new president for the university, Lord Stephen Taylor, in part because I think Joe Smallwood liked the idea of a member of the British House of Lords being president of the university, right? I seem to remember him saying, we'll be the only university in the world that has a member of the House of Lords as its president, right? And you can imagine, why this would appeal. Now, Taylor, say bad things about him. Taylor was a bit of a twit. Taylor also came into a difficult situation. Not only did he have Joe Smallwood kind of meddling with him, but Mose Morgan had been vice president of the university, and Mose Morgan badly wanted to be president. He saw being president as it's his turn, right? And so before Lord Taylor got off of the boat, Mose Morgan reorganized the university administration to put everything that mattered in the control of the office of the vice president, leaving the two things that didn't matter in control of Lord Taylor. What are the two things that didn't matter? the Botanical Garden, and the Art Gallery. So Lord Taylor, who was a bit of a micromanager as well, it's amazing to see Lord Taylor, fiddling around with what kind of little brass tags are we going to have on the frames of painters, right? He wanted to get right in there. So Lord Taylor and Peter Bell for a while had this cooperative relationship, right? Bell allowed Taylor to buy art when Taylor bought art from a list that Peter Bell had provided for him, right? Say, you can pick out the art, Lord Taylor, that you buy, but here's a list of artists whose work you can buy, and you'll recognize all of the names, right, from these. And here's a list of people that you shouldn't buy art from, right? So the two men got along for a while. But again, this is the second time I'm going to use the word inevitable. It was inevitable that Taylor, who had a great faith in his ability to learn anything, his ability to know anything, his ability that he knew right, and Peter Bell, who was a little bit like him. It's inevitable that the two wouldn't get along as well. Taylor, to give you an example, when the recreational painters complained to Taylor, how come we can't hang our paintings in the gallery? We want to hang our paintings. Why can't we do that? So Taylor said, well, tell you what we'll do. We'll have an exhibition that everybody in St. John's who wants to submit a painting will take one of their paintings, every single one. There'll be no adjudication, right? We'll take one painting from everybody that wants to give them. We'll give everybody a cup of tea, and we'll have a judge who will go around and will say something nice about every single one of them so that everybody will feel good. Now this, for Peter Bell, was just the most unimaginably awful thing that you could imagine. Bell's philosophy was, how do you improve the quality of people's art? You exclude the amateurs, right? So that you only have the professionals. So then the amateurs will realize, hey, they're not accepting my work. I had better try harder. I'd better work harder, right? So for Bell, there's two ways that you improve the quality of art. One is that you exclude everybody that doesn't meet your standard. So you can see why he's outraged by Taylor's idea about saying something nice about everybody. And the second way that Bell thought about improving everybody's art was you get a column in the newspaper of art criticism, and you say what you mean. Right? You tell people what's wrong with their paintings. And I've read, there's hundreds of Peter Bell's columns. Art criticism, I've read quite a few of them. I haven't read them all, I've read quite a few of them. He's a great art critic. He's good. I haven't seen the painting, so I might have a different opinion than him. Doesn't matter. I don't really know about anything about art anyway. But so you could see that for the recreational painters, they're not allowed to they can't get their stuff in the walls of the Arts and Culture Center, even though their taxes pay for it. And you got Peter Bell saying bad things about them in the paper. So Lord Taylor called Peter Bell into his office and said, Peter, this can't go on. You're being wasted as a gallery director. You're such a fantastic artist. I've decided to give you a lateral promotion. I'm going to make you painter in ordinary, which was, of course, a slightly ridiculous title. Why painter in ordinary? Well, there was already painters in residence, right? There were people like Jerry Squires, right, would, teach painting in Fairyland, or Don Wright would go to places and teach painting. Right, Frank Lapointe would teach painting. So there was already this tradition of having painters go to places to teach. So they had to come up with this other name, and they had this kind of ridiculous name, painter in ordinary. So Bell was kind of shoved off. He still had a job, but he was shoved off into this painter in ordinary job. And Frank Lapointe, Newfoundland born and Ontario College of Art trained artist, was put in place. Now, Lapointe, who I've met, is a lovely man. Lapointe had all of the same problems with with Lord Taylor that that Bell had. For Lapointe, the straw came when Lapointe was told, you can go to the meetings of the Atlantic Provinces Art Council, but you're not allowed to agree to bring in any exhibitions from the mainland. You're not, right? Lord Taylor said, I don't like, these are the last paintings I saw were badly drawn nudes that were awful, and they were paintings of hockey players, and hockey is not very artistic, and right, so I don't want any more of that Canadian art stuff. That's really, really no good. There's a whole lot of beautiful Newfoundland art, right? People painting flowers and that kind of thing. That's what you should get. We don't want any more of this. So Lapointe resigned again, also to take up his full-time career as an artist, because he couldn't live with Peter Bell, with Lord Taylor, right, preventing him from reaching any kind of agreement. And of course, from Taylor's point of view, how do you convince a gallery in Nova Scotia to take Newfoundland art if the gallery in St. John's won't take any Nova Scotia art? You just can't do it. So Lord Taylor was towards the end of his career and shortly going to shuffle off of stage. And Mun Extension was asked to put the gallery back on its footing. And so they made, I think, an excellent choice instead of hiring an artist, right? Because they just had 3 artists. Instead of hiring an artist, they hired a full-time professional cultural administrator, somebody who had worked for Mun Extension for quite some time, Edith Goodrich. And Goodrich and her successor, Pat Grattan, Goodrich and Grattan, 2 women after 3 men, and these are 2 women who are professional administrators, right? They are able to answer the correspondence, they're able to pay the bills, they're able to handle a budget, they're able to do all of the things that the artists are unable to do. Edith Goodrich not only was able to manage the gallery, but Edith Goodrich had a working relationship with John Perlin, which was not always easy, but she was able to work with John, able to sort that. She had a great relationship with all of the recreational painters. She was able to smooth all of that over. And she embraced the younger generation of cultural creators that made the gallery into what the journalist Sandra Gwynn called the command post, the cultural command post of the Cultural Revolution, right? So for Goodrich, people like Chris Brooks, of the Mummers Troupe, people like people from the Codco, Ryan's Fancy, the Irish musicians, all of those people were welcome into the gallery to kind of come in, hang around, talk to each other, go to the Playhouse bar, right, and have some have some drink. And Goodrich became, in some respects, she became the Newfoundland Arts Council before there was a Newfoundland Arts Council. Because she was able to talk to people in the cultural community, not just visual artists, but musicians and theaters and theatrical people and all that, to able to tell them, well, the Canada Council has this program you can apply for, and this is where you get the form, and this is how you fill it in, and right. And so for Edith Goodrich was a dynamo in encouraging everybody. You're doing great things. Newfoundland is an exciting place. We've got this great cultural community, and this paid off, right? With a lot of artists from other provinces and many from other countries as well. Coming to St. John's, in part because of the gallery, in part because of Munn Extension, and in part because of the St. Michael's print shop, which was a outgrowth, right? It was an outgrowth of Munn Extension and the gallery. And so it was a really, really vibrant cultural place. And just as Peter Bell had put on a really vibrant and large number of exhibitions, so too Goodrich was able to, have a fantastic and exciting kind of cultural scene. So much so that Goodrich was offered a job with the Canada Council in Ottawa and moved out of the province for some years before she retired and came back. So by the 1980s, the gallery was in crisis again, and this time hired Patricia Grattan. And Pat Grattan was someone with a degree in art history from Concordia, another professional administrator. She had worked with Munn Extension, had great success in many ways. She knew the gallery. And Pat took over during a time when the university was undergoing a financial crisis. Art galleries and institutions across Canada were undergoing financial crisis. The federal government was in a period of austerity. It was turning the taps off of money. And Grattan instituted a whole lot of professional changes that made her unpopular. Some of these are not at all her fault. Instead of having, 30 exhibitions a year, she had to do only 15. So this means that some artists who were used to having a show, not able to have one. And she took the blame for that. She was also far more of a stickler, and I think this is for people's good. She was far more a stickler of saying that, oh yeah, if you're going to have an exhibition, we have to have a signed contract, and this is what you're going to deliver, and you got to live up to it. When many artists had been far more accustomed to the idea of, I'll have a show. I haven't made any paintings yet, but I'll bring you something when I'm ready. So for Grattan, she instituted these changes to kind of put the gallery on a more business-like footing, which were not very much liked by artists. At this same time, and again, this is not Grattan's fault, but there was a resurgence of Newfoundland national feeling, right? Part of this we've already talked about in the cultural revival and in Codco and Figgy Duff and all of that. And Grattan, as being a woman from the mainland, and the new art school opened in Corner Brook, and what did they do? They hired mainlanders, and the Arts Council, the newly formed Arts Council, was also that year headed by somebody who was not born in Newfoundland. And so for many Newfoundland artists and many people in the cultural community, they thought, oh, times are getting tighter, jobs are jobs are in less, right? There's fewer jobs, there's less money going around, and we see these tiny little bit of money, we see this going to come from a ways. We see this coming to CFAs. And it looks like, well, you know, if you want a job in Newfoundland, you got to have an MBA or be a CFA. And so there was a lot of kind of anti-mainland feeling in some circles. Now, many Newfoundland artists did not feel that way, right? Many Newfoundland artists were incredibly welcoming too, as Kathleen Nolan put it, to the Newfoundlanders by birth and the Newfoundlanders by choice. They, right? Very admirable. But people like Jerry Squires felt like, oh yeah, here's these people from the mainland, they come here and they don't know Newfoundland culture. So who are they to be speaking for Newfoundland art? Because they don't know Newfoundland culture. Jerry Squires had on his answering machine, if you phoned him and he wasn't home, he had on his answering machine, he had a parody of the line from the Leonard Cohen song, right? First we'll take Pat Grattan, then we'll take Perlin, right? And it sort of encapsulates this kind of feeling like of you know, Newfoundlanders, we've got to be masters in our own house. We've got to be in control of our own culture. So Grattan suffered a bit from the financial conditions that would have been the case for every gallery in the country, but also the kind of local feeling that we're all under stress here now and we're not getting our fair share of things. As the university tightened its belt, the gallery's budget was cut. The gallery, after all, was not essential core to the university's mission, which was teaching students and, right, that sort of thing. And so Grattan was facing a diminished budget and also a difficulty of raising money herself. Because if she went to local businesses and said, oh, I would like you to donate some money to the gallery, their response would be, well, we've already given some money to the university, I'm sorry. So Grattan decided that the gallery had to be separate from the university. Its long-term future was independence. It should have its own building so that it had a physical identity. So people would know, oh, I'm going to go to the gallery. No longer being a tenant in the Arts and Culture Center, right? To have its own gallery and its own identity. So it was renamed from the Monarch Gallery, renamed to the Art Gallery of Newfoundland and Labrador. A way of, right, symbolically severing it from the connection to MUN. Set up its own budget and looked for independence. But by the 1980s, it was really impossible. The 1980s and 1990s, it was impossible for the university to create a new building. And they got wind of a proposal to create a single building for the Provincial Archives and the Newfoundland Museum, both of which were in old repurposed buildings that were not well suited to their needs and had poor climate control and needed to be replaced. So the provincial government, and this is a good bit of luck, we can imagine the provincial government asked the federal government, oh, we want a building in honor of John Cabot to serve this cultural need. So, you know, we can thank God we missed the provincial government, the federal government said no, because you can imagine now the furor that would have happened a decade later when we all think, oh yeah, we can't have a building named after John Cabot, right? So Grattan reluctantly accepted what was the least worst choice, right? Of moving out of the lap of the university administration, which had never been very comfortable, right? And into an institution that they're sharing with the Provincial Archives and the Newfoundland Museum. This is another one of those instances, I think, where you want to be careful what you ask for, because the separate identity and all of that became lost in the shuffle of them getting what, to my eye, is an excellent climate-controlled vault for the storage of their material, very fine exhibition space in a, right, that is very much more well-suited than those little rooms over at the Arts and Culture Center with their awful orange carpet, which again, some of you may remember that as well. So in each of these phases of the gallery's history, from the 1920s, when it was really a nationalist thing, of these people thinking, well, you know, Newfoundland, we're a small country, but we should have our own art, right? We need to have our own art and culture. To then, you know, Peter Bell's era of well, Newfoundland should be engaged in an artistic conversation with the mainland, artistic conversation with Canada. To then Edith Goodrich's years, right, of creating a vibrant Newfoundland culture that was really interdisciplinary and cross mediums, across a lot of mediums. To then Pat Gradden thinking, well, if we need to put this on a sound business footing, and part of that means that you argue to government that we should have a gallery building downtown because it will draw people down there instead of having them go out to the Avalon Mall and the big box stores on the outside, right? So the rooms is in part a bringing these cultural institutions together because they all need housing with climate control, and it's also in part accepting that by the 1990s, an argument that your visual arts is an industry. It's a source of tourism money. It's a source of employment. It's an industry, and the gallery is important because of that. I could go on, but maybe this is a good point to stop in case anybody would like to ask something. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That was a wonderful talk, and you've ended with a good bit of time for questions. So we'll check in with our folks online in a moment there. Oh, I can see our technical person is getting that we don't have any questions online. I do want to note for those of you who are with us on WebEx, if you do have one, please put it into the chat and we'll get to you. However, I do, of course, want to turn to our audience here in person. Would anybody like to ask? I see hands already. I'll come to you.
Hi, Dr. Webb, Jeff, I don't want to put you to the spot here, but
sure.
I grew up in this city in the 1970s, 80s, and well, sorry. It seemed as though the dynamism, which was promised by the Arts and Culture Center, drifted away from it. And the excitement ended up at the LSPU Hall, the real excitement, and then the other excitement moved to the rooms. I've always perceived, perhaps inaccurately, the ACC as a kind of institutional orphan that somehow didn't live up to its architectural or cultural promise as it was presented to the Newfoundland public in the 1960s and 70s. And it's like a monument with a big question mark hanging over it, to me at least. Any feelings about that?
Well, I'm from Gander, so I don't have any opinion on that whatsoever. I, I, I think there's a bunch of answers to that. One is that the Arts and Culture Center was too big for its role. The main theater with the stage there has so many seats that in order to fill it to capacity and cover your overhead costs, you've got to have a show that really packs people in there. And so John Perlin was immensely unpopular among many younger artistic people in the city. And part of that is because he would book acts which they had no respect for, like the illusionist Ravine, and who many of you will remember too. I remember Ravine. And you know, the Carlton Show Band, right? That he would book acts which he felt, because after all, he was responsible to his political masters, right? They would look at, well, how many seats do you fill, right? You know, how much is the heat and light in the building, all of that sort of thing. So he was caught. So from his point of view, I shouldn't be speaking for him, but from his point of view, I think Codco is not going to be able to fill that theater. And so what happens is the Mummers Troupe build the LSPU Hall, which is much smaller, which they control, which they can go in. So some of the dynamism for Newfoundland experimental culture and risk-taking goes to places like St. Michael's Print Shop, which is small, and the LSP Hall, which is small, and then the less risk-taking things, which have already been proven themselves with success in other theaters, that goes to the Arts and Culture Center. So I think that if there is an answer to this, I think that that is a part of the answer to what you identify as something that's real, I think.
Thank you. I'd like to raise a different aspect to this. As a visual artist, my name's Diana Davenant. I arrived here 50 years ago in 1975, and I'd been working at the London Art Gallery in London, Ontario as an assistant curator. But I came to be a professional self-employed artist here. And I must say it was one of the most magical things. One of the first things I did was walk into the old art gallery up at the Arts and Culture Center. And I met Edith Goodrich at Plank Lapointe straight away. And very quickly became friends with Peter Bell, also John Perlin to some extent, but became very involved in the art scene from a point of view of a practicing artist. And there was a whole other side to the art scene that was not covered by the university and the formalized setup. We started the Eastern Edge Gallery. We started off with the Annex Gallery down at the Mon Extension, but we formed the Eastern Edge Gallery and all sorts of other initiatives. So I think that there is a whole other side to your story that is really a much more human one that was very exciting to be part of.
I think that's absolutely true, and there's a personal dimension to that as well, in that this is a book written during COVID, where I was relying entirely upon the written record and did not have access, as much as I would have liked to have been able to interview people, to have to be able to talk to people. So it's circumscribed by that, and also it would have been a much bigger book if I had discussed all or even many of the other kinds of artistic things. It really focuses very heavily on the gallery. I was just checking my memory in the index. You are actually mentioned in here twice, so yes, and yes. Oh, yes, certainly.
Can everyone hear me? Yes. If you can't, say.
Chris Pratt was a member of the Art Association,
Mhm.
and he showed with them, and I was too, and that's one of the reasons he could get on with them, because he was one of them.
Yes.
The other thing I want to say is the arts and letters. First of all, the galleries wouldn't, arts and culture wouldn't be shown in the.
Right.
Then they realized that it was a way of putting people who had actually won something, and now they show it in the rooms and did show it in the Arts and Culture Center. So that kind of problem solved itself.
Right.
The other thing I want to say is Edith was very welcoming to you.
Yeah.
I was an aspiring artist, and because I was from the, we'll say, the St. John's aristocracy, very well educated, they all looked at me, a lot of people looked at me as a, and Edith did, because as a, nice lady who wanted to play at being an artist. I was very serious about what I was doing because I had a very good education and I knew what standards were. So Edith was no friend to female artists. She was great for the men.
I got along with her really well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that it, yeah.
Dan McNeil was my husband.
Oh,
Was my
I didn't know that. That's great.
CFUW.
Yes.
Chair, had a conference in Gander with the WI to educate women about the disabilities they suffer in society. So I've got my feet.
You do indeed. There were a lot of tensions too that, of course, I'm not able to talk about all of them. The relationship between David Blackwood and Edith Goodrich, and David Blackwood and Peter Bell were often very difficult ones. So Blackwood would write these letters, and at one point a letter would be they would be very, very friendly, and then a little while later it's well, Peter, what you've said about me, I'm gonna hire a lawyer, I'm gonna sue you. There was a real there were real tensions between different personalities. Not everybody is able to de-escalate. Not everybody is able to smooth things over. I admire the people that are. Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. That was fascinating. I've been wondering because I'm working the heritage sector, and I've become a bit of an accidental historian of architecture. And even though I enjoy the fine arts, the performing arts, it's not really I don't have a lot of understanding in it. But as a Newfoundlander, a born Newfoundlander who grew up away from Newfoundland and was raised by my parents, immersed in Newfoundland culture, or at least as they define Newfoundland culture, it seems to me that following the collapse of the cod fishery and the moratorium and Newfoundland's economic doldrums, that there was a real resurgence or a surgence of Newfoundland music and literature and television and film, being exported from Newfoundland, from to the mainland. And I was just wondering if there was a similar, benefit seen by the fine arts sector as well, or if there is a causation correlation happening there.
I wish I had a better answer for that, Ron. This isn't such a cop out. It's complicated. There are a lot of tiers going on there. Tiers as in like so for somebody like David Blackwood, who has a career in which he lives most of the time in Ontario, but part of the time in Wesleyville, and never feels he's part of the St. John's scene, never feels that he's, right? I mean, I mentioned in the book him writing one letter, he said, I thank God every day I wasn't born in St. John's, that I have a real, culture for me to draw upon for my art. I don't need to make it up like these people at St. John's. That last part's not a quote. But so for somebody like Blackwood, he becomes iconographic for Newfoundland. Or somebody, and then part of that is, his Lost Parties series hits, right? And one of those prints is on the cover of Cassie Brown's very, very fine novel about the Newfoundland disaster. And so there are always a small number of Newfoundland creative people, whether you're talking about Codco or Figgy Duff or, Mary and Christopher Pratt. There's a small number of Newfoundland creative people that are able to become Newfoundland for a mainland audience. And then there are a whole lot of other creative people that don't make that break into being part of the national market. Peter Bell had some, I thought, insightful but maybe unkind comments about how for Christopher Pratt, it didn't matter whether anybody liked him in Newfoundland or not, because the price of his art got set by the Canadian art market. While many other visual artists, the price of their work got set by a local art market, and they would have difficulty bridging that gap. The gallery played a role for many people. If we imagine a world without the gallery at all, I think there's a small number of Newfoundland artists who would have had great careers and would have had great success. But there's a lot of other Newfoundland artists who had very, very good careers. But if it hadn't been for Bell, and if it hadn't been for Edith Goodrich, and if it hadn't been for Pat Grattan, giving them exhibitions, giving them support, giving them opportunities, showing their work on the mainland, they would have had to have found some other way of earning a living. I remember talking to J.C. Roy before I started this project. I'm talking to J.C. Roy, and he was saying, well, Edith Goodrich played a big role in very, very early on in giving him the kind of connections and the confidence to think that he could make a living as a painter. So the gallery played a big role in a lot of people's careers. I know that's not really answering your question, but yeah.
Thank you so much. I just want to check really quickly if they're checked. Do we have any questions from online folks? Okay, all good. I think we have one or two more here in the audience, and I think we've got enough time for that. So here we go.
Hello, Dr. Webb. Thank you, sir. As you're telling the story about the extension services going around the little villages, and maybe the idea of this pseudo-aristocratic gentleman teaching the fishermen coming up. My grandfather was a fisherman, and very intelligent chap and all that. But I was just trying to get in my mind these fellows coming off the boats and splitting in rooms, and then all of a sudden they're met by this person with the canvas. Did any of these? Did anyone that you know of actually begin to paint or begin to do something that they engaged with?
Sure. There were. Again, it's hard to know if they would have done it anyway. Arch Williams in Fairyland, he may well have become a painter without ever meeting Stuart Montgomery and Jerry Squires, perhaps, or perhaps he wouldn't. Or Barber, I have forgotten his first name now, not Chess Barber, but there was a man in Buena Vista Bay also who painted, and maybe he would have taught himself entirely independently of Mon Extension and the gallery, we can't know. So yeah, there were links for sure.
Wonderful. I think I have one more back here, and then we'll have one more down in front, and that'll have wrap us for the evening.
Thank you for the lecture, Dr. Webb. In the 70s, I came in from Deer Lake to St. John's to go to MUN, and one of the presentations I saw was Codco, which transformed my entire self-definition of being Newfoundlander. Mm-hmm. So it was a part of that period where that was flourishing, and we were being taught to laugh at ourselves, but not in that self-defeating type of way that from Newfie joke book type stuff. Mm-hmm. And from that period to be involved with the theater and film scene and things like that, to see people coming through it and progressing and being aware of the politics of the Arts and Culture Center and this type of thing, it was all there. I'm leading up to the question. I think my heart was broken when Gordon got fired when they moved to the rooms as a part of the house cleaning to make it something else that was different from what his vision was. So I just wanted to ask, does your book go up to that period, or
it doesn't. For a couple of reasons. You have to have a clean point to stop the book. Myself and a friend, a few years ago, we were writing a textbook, and we were joking that, the last line in our paragraph, the last line of the book was going to say, and now that Danny Williams is premier, we will never have another day of poverty. And, knowing at that time that there was great risk that events would prove us wrong. I stopped at the point where the rooms is in its planning and the gallery is going to be incorporated. I thought I would leave the story of the rooms for someone else another day. And there's also, that's also a cowardly act in a way too. It was easier for me to tell the people at the rooms, oh yeah, I'm not going to talk about the rooms. Because of course it had been, as everyone remembers, the siting of building it on top of Fort Townsend had been immensely controversial, right, Peter? And so that was it was a convenient end point. But certainly, I think the cultural history since then, both in the visual arts and also and it's still going on even now, even not that long ago, they reorganized. I don't know anything about this, so I may be wrong. They reorganized so that you've got like an exhibitions person who does work for the gallery and the museum and the archive, a curator who does all three, a programming person who does all three. So instead of having three separate administrations sharing a building, now they are organized much more laterally. And I am certain that is a difficult and uncomfortable transition for the people that work there. It will probably be a good thing in some ways, and something will be lost in other ways. But that's life, isn't it? Right? Every change has good and bad things.
All right, we have time for one more now as we bring the evening to a close.
To be me. Do you think there's such a thing as Newfoundland Labrador art? Are we distinctive in that, do you think?
For me, what's interesting is the arguments around that. So there isn't a single answer to a question like that. there are different points of view and different conceptions. I very much liked Kathleen Noling's remark at one point, don't remember exactly when, about rejecting the idea that Newfoundland art has to be one thing and making fun a little bit of, so what's a Newfoundland painting going to be? A broken down fish stage, right? 3 rocks and an old tree, right?
That's the ideal.
Right. And I that's my view too, in that a single definition of Newfoundland art or Newfoundland music or Newfoundland literature or Newfoundland history, a single definition is going to exclude a whole lot of people that have something to contribute. So I think the argument where people arguing, right, Jerry Squires feeling very, very combative about one view, and then somebody else taking a different ask. That to me as a historian, that's really interesting to see the dialogue.
No artist is like another artist. So
Yeah.
right across Canada, you have a whole lot of different artists, settler artists, Indigenous artists, all across the world you have that.
Yeah.
African artists, not like South American art, and
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But the fact that you have, say, there's African art, there's Flemish art.
Sure. But
each one
yeah.
is done differently by an artist. So you can't
Yeah.
find them roughly.
And the boundaries are things that people fight over, right? The boundaries, and so that's that I think is what makes it it's what makes it a thing, right? In part of my talk tonight, I talked about the tension between amateur artists and professional artists, and some of the amateur artists were selling paintings and were great great artists. And maybe some of the professional artists who'd been to art school and the whole sort of thing, and maybe their work is not that good. I have my own, taste, I guess. I think Helen Parsons Shepherd is great. Reginald Shepherd, I don't care for. Someone else may have a different view. That's only my taste from looking at it. But these arguments are interesting ones. I had a completely different talk in mind before I came here tonight. I was going to, for those of you who have not noticed it, right outside the door here is Red Trench, and I had an entirely different talk on the history of Red Trench that I was entirely prepared to give. So, yeah. Thank you.
All right.